Welcome back to Strawberry Ink. Before we begin, today's episode is a listener discretion warning. This episode contains gruesome topics and sensitive themes are discussed. Therefore, listener discretion is strongly advised. Cases rarely get as gruesome as this. Victoria Elizabeth Mary Stafford, known to friends and family as Tori, was a vibrant, outgoing 8-year-old girl from Woodstock, Ontario. She was a bright, curious kid who loved nature, insects, ice cream, especially bubblegum flavor, and played dress up with her cousins. She lived a lively spirit, always exploring the world behind her, often barefoot, refusing to wear socks, even in the winter, claiming she hated them, and leaving her shoes prone to a natural odor. Her family remembers her with an enormous amount of love and energy. They described her as a burst of life, whose smile and personality lit up any room. Tori's refusal to wear socks was a defining quirk. Her shoes often became stinky as a result, a small human detail that would later intersect with the tragic circumstances surrounding her abduction and murder. Parents, this is an important reminder. Children who resist wearing socks may develop smelly feet and smelly shoes, which can be a sign of regular, edit that, which can be a sign to regularly check shoes and foot hygiene. Maybe take a little sniff to check. Well, this, edit that. Well, this detail is small. In Tori's case, it became part of the evidence investigators pieced together. Before we return to the story of Tori Stafford, let's take a step back in history to Thanksgiving's origins. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. When the Pilgrims arrived in what is now Massachusetts in 1620, they landed on Wampanoag land. Initially, relations were cooperative. Chief Massasoit and the Wampanoag taught the newcomers how to grow corn, hunt, and fish. This collaboration led to what is properly remembered as the first Thanksgiving in 1621. However, this cooperation did not last. As settlers arrived, European colonists seized land, often violating agreements with the indigenous peoples. They brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, which decimated native communities. Over time, conflicts escalated, with colonists imposing unfair laws, forcing displacement, and sometimes engaging in armed violence. Massacres occurred, as during King Philip's War in 1670s, which resulted in tremendous loss for Native Americans. In short, while early interactions included trade and limited cooperation, the overall impact of Pilgrim and European settlement on indigenous peoples was catastrophic, resulting in loss of land, widespread death, and suffering. The romanticized Thanksgiving story often overlooks this history. We think about turkey, mashed potatoes, all that yummy food, and we picture what we're going to buy at Black Friday the next day, or what we're going to shop for on Cyber Monday, which is now known as Cyber Week. But we do not trace through the origins of Thanksgiving. At least most people look through what they're thankful for. But I believe this story about the pilgrims is quite important. Without them, there would be no holiday. However, they should have done better by sharing that territory with the natives. There was no need to take them down and to push them all the way to the Cherokee Nation. Maybe they do deserve to lose a bit of attention. Now, back to 2009. Victoria Stafford, Tori, 8 years old, never returned home from school one day. Her mom, Tara McDonald, grew concerned after hours passed without Tori returning. She called the school. The principal assisted her in contacting the police, since nobody at the school had any idea of where she could have gone. Surveillance footage was reviewed, showing Tori walking with a young lady to a car. Initially, authorities thought it was her mother, but this was no woman. It was an 18-year-old girl named Terry Lynn McClintock. Tori's mother knew who this girl was, so she told them where she lived. The Ontario Provincial Police arrested McClintock on May 20th, 2009, my mom's birthday, at her family home in Woodstock, Ontario, and took her to their detachment for questioning. She admitted to walking to Tori and then approaching her and walking her to the car, claiming she wanted to show her a puppy. She then implicated 28-year-old Michael Rafferty as the abductor. She told the investigators where he lived. Therefore, officers went to that property, which was in a rural area in the woods. They raided this home at Mount Forest, Ontario, believing that this was a crime scene. And they were right. At the detachment, after he had been arrested during the hardcore raid, he denied any involvement, despite surveillance evidence and recovered clothing matching Tori's attire. A black Hannah Montana jacket that she was seen wearing in the surveillance footage, a green sweater, black leotards, and shoes. At first, the police thought that Tori had worn pantyhose to school, not leotards. But that's when Tori's father confirmed that the clothing found at the suspect's home belonged to her. He also noted to them that Tori hated socks. She was barefoot all the time, which explained why what she would have worn was leotards and not pantyhose. He claimed that putting something on Tori's feet was a hustle, and that even when he took her and let her come on a family trip to British Columbia when it was so cold, Tori chose to wear her yellow Crocs without socks in the cold. He described his daughter as a girl who was different than most kids in her school, which made her the target of bullying. But Tori was not one to run away. She definitely had no idea of what was going to happen to her. Her dad did claim that she was the youngest in the family and had an older brother who would sometimes upset her. You know, siblings can get into arguments. But Tori could not stand that and hated it. She hated it when someone would say something mean to her. And she was the kind of girl who cried easily. She had a hardcore scream and a high-pitched cry. That is mainly what made her a target of bullying. She was known as the school's weird kid and crime baby. However, she was very sweet to neighbors. So, there really would be no reason to suspect that Tori was desperate to leave her family. Tori's black shoes were recovered from 18-year-old McClintock's home. She had washed them, which initially appeared to be suspicious. Investigators initially thought she was evidence tampering. However, they discovered that she intended to donate them to Goodwill and was preparing to do so. Tori's father did not suspect her of having tampered. He explained that Tori's shoes were often smelly due to her refusal to wear socks. They had a cheesy foot smell on them, a seemingly minor habit that became a piece of forensic evidence linking McClintock to the crime. He claimed that he would not be surprised if someone would want to wash them to donate them to Goodwill due to their policies, and that there is no doubt that there was no bad intention behind washing these shoes. This was a key takeaway for parents to monitor their children's footwear habits. Socks are not just for comfort, they help prevent odor and protect feet. This small detail surprisingly played a role in this tragic investigation. But nowadays, things are changing. Many of the youth, especially the girls, are wearing socks less. And since people barely care about odor these days, at least they're caring less. This is no longer as big as a takeaway. On July 19th, 2009, Tori's body was found in the woods near Michael's home. She was almost naked. Her panties were near the body. The Hannah Montana jacket and t-shirt remained. Her legs and feet were bare and dirty. On July 21st, 2009, the Toronto Forensic Pathology Unit confirmed the body was Tori's. They established her cause of death as murder by blunt force trauma. She had 16 broken ribs, severe head trauma, and a torn liver. A claw hammer was recovered from Michael's home. This was identified as the murder weapon. The prosecutor, Crown Attorney Kevin Gowdy, charged Michael Rafferty with first-degree murder and Terry Lynn McClintock with accessory. Defense attorneys were private. Michael retained Joseph Callaghan and Terry retained Daniel Shearer. They were private due to the severity of the alleged crimes. On May 20th, 2009, both made their first court appearance before Judge Michael Tulloch. They pleaded not guilty to the charges and were remanded into the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London, Ontario. On May 28, 2009, the Crown prosecutor added first-degree murder and unlawful confinement charges against Terry. She eventually pleaded guilty on April 30th, 2010, receiving 25 years to life in prison. She was also required to testify against Michael at his trial. Michael Rafferty was put on trial on March 5, 2012, before a jury of 12 members and 4 alternates. On the 11th day of that month, the jury found him guilty on all charges. On March 15th that month, Justice Thomas Heaney sentenced him to prison time as well, 25 years to life. Both appealed, but the Ontario Court of Appeal rejected them on October 24th, 2016. To this day, Terry is at the Grand Valley Institution in Kitchener, Ontario, and Michael at the Kingston Penitentiary in Ontario. Tori was deeply loved despite a difficult early life. Her parents split when she was 2.5 years old, and her mother struggled with addiction. She was spunky, curious, outdoorsy, and full of joy. She hated socks, loved ice cream, adored Hannah Montana, and spent her days exploring nature. Her private memorial was held on July 27, 2009, at the Longworth Funeral Home in Woodstock, and she was buried at the Oxford Memorial Park Cemetery. Family and friends remember her as a bright spark of life, her laughter and impish grin lingering in memory. Here is an article posted online about her. This article is called Victoria Stafford, a deeply happy child who loved ice cream but hated socks. Victoria Elizabeth Stafford did not have the easiest life. Her parents split up when she was 2.5 years old. Her father admits he was not always around. Her mother admits an addiction to painkillers really affected her while parenting. But by all accounts, she was a deeply happy and well-adjusted child. Surprisingly, she was surrounded by an enormous amount of love. Her little body has not been found, at least at the time of this article. This is basically the mother discussing the disappearance and admitting that maybe the foul living conditions her daughter was being put through caused this disappearance. Then the mother claims that a memorial service will be held Saturday to remember a girl. She went on to claim those who were central figures in her short life, her father, grandmothers, aunts, and uncles, say she was a bright spark of life filled with love. She was beautiful, sweet baby, but would just not sleep, full of energy. When Tori the toddler was put down for the night, she would keep popping up and peering over the rail of her crib. Her maternal grandmother's trick was to scratch her back and get her to sleep. It was a custom Linda Winter shared with Tori, and that started with her older brother, Darren. Victoria's spunky spirit would abound for the rest of her almost 9 years of life, as her relatives remember a girl who was always on the go. People should remember her burst of life. That was what Aunt Randy Millen claimed. She loved music as spooky as her. Again, edit that. She loved music as spunky as her, and whenever her uncle Steve Millen put on the hamster dance, Victoria and her cousins would start bouncing around. The only times Randy Millen ever saw Tori sitting still were at medieval times, a Toronto diner theater show that features jousting and the Nutcracker Ballet. Even movies were difficult for this active child to sit through. The longer she sat, the antsier she got. She was always a little pistol, her paternal grandmother, Doreen Gratian, said. As a younger girl, she was more timid and quiet, but as she grew up, she did her outgoing personality. She was not afraid to talk to anyone and show compassion for old people. Tori was often hyper, but she also loved to hug and to cuddle. She would spend many hours with Winters, sitting in a chair together, wrapped up in a blanket and reading the Bible. In pictures, her white blonde hair and beaming face show a radiant little girl. In several photos, she seems to have decided a simple smile would not suffice, and instead flashed the camera a massive, open-mouthed grin that nearly enveloped her face. That somewhat impish smile has been transmitted all across Canada and on flyers her family made when Victoria went missing. 2 people have now been charged with first-degree murder, and tragically the search for the bright, bubbly girl has become a grim hunt for her remains. That was something reported while the family members were being questioned. On Friday, police established a dedicated tip line. +1 866 825 4222. That was for the public to call with any information that might aid the search. In many regards, Victoria was a typical 8-year-old, but while she was a giggly, girly girl, she was also fascinated by insects and nature. Victoria loved to play dress-up, stage in fashion shows, and painting her nails of her cousins, as well as having tea parties. She loved to shop and had several t-shirts with that fact proudly emblazoned across the front. Known as Tori to some and Princess Victoria to others, she loved the popular girl-oriented franchises of Hannah Montana, Mary-Kate, and Ashley Olsen, Barbie and Bratz, Winters recalls, and Sparkles. She loved Sparkles. Victoria had a penchant for ice cream, especially bubblegum flavor. Winters remembers her picking out the pieces of gum one by one and saving them for last. Little Victoria was also a budding artist, pretty careful effort into creating beautiful birthday, Valentine's Day, and Christmas cards for her relatives, often with a roses are red, violets are blue poem inside. She was content to spend hours drawing and sketching, and was happy as long as she had a pencil and paper. In fact, when no paper was available, Tori would make do. Her dad recalls many important document getting covered with smiley faces and stick figures. This is something her dad would confront and punish her for, and to this day he regrets doing so to that girl, because she really had no bad intention in doing so. But she was also a nature buff and was constantly exploring the world around her. Victoria was always catching snakes, worms, and salamanders, sometimes while wearing a dress, which seemed pretty strange. To my perspective, she showed signs of being in the autism spectrum, and also she had very few friends. She would even play with spiders and other bugs that made their way into the house, as if those insects were her besties, which maybe they were. Outdoorsy to the she spent what time she could swimming, biking, skipping stones, and helping Gretchen in the garden, taking time and great care to figure out the perfect spot for each flower she planted. Victoria was in her element on a trip to Alberta last summer, surrounded by the beautiful mountains and nature. It was stuff that was supposed to be a lifetime of memories for her, Gretchen said. The little princess was carefree, fluttery girl who would spend her summer days running across neighbors' lawns barefoot. That neighbors spotted the little girl barefoot would come as no surprise to family members who say Tori absolutely hated socks. She went without them whenever she could, and her shoes would stink as a result. Even in the winter, they would have a hard time getting her to put anything on her feet. The last time her father took her on one of their many walks, in the cold days before she went missing, Victoria wore only Crocs on her feet, with no socks, of course. The refusal to wear socks, even in inclement weather, is indicative of the little girl with a big personality and an attitude to match, her dad said. Victoria had an ear-piercing scream that would sometimes come out when she was mad, sometimes when she was happy, and sometimes just for the fun of showing everyone how loudly she could scream. That scream that she expressed when she was angry was what usually got her grounded. When she did not get things her own way, Victoria would storm off to her room and slam her door not once but twice. She was just learning how to best get her own way and could turn the waterworks on and off as needed. But what truly upset her the most was fighting with her beloved brother Darren. He was just 2 years older than his sister, and She was always trying to keep up with him, all relatives say. Darren is an A or B student while Tori was a B or C student, and it was a constant source of frustration for her. She was jealous that she could not be like her brother and wished that her brother would include her more in the stuff he did. She didn't really like doing her homework, so she and her dad had to have a little chat about that. It would be one of the last times they talked. Something negative. Victoria and Darren went through a lot together and had a rock solid bond. They were everything to each other and would do anything for one another. Whenever Tori was crying, protective Darren would try to confront her, even if he was the reason why she was crying. She never liked fighting with her brother, her dad, Rodney Stafford said. Every time he got mad at her, she felt like she was losing her best friend. Tori Stafford's story is a heart-wrenching reminder of the importance of vigilance, care, and community in protecting your children. Even small details, like socks and shoes, can play a role in both the daily safety of your child and in uncovering justice when tragedy occurs. That is it for this episode. I will let you keep enjoying your Thanksgiving. I hope you've had fun so far and have a good rest of your day.